was not only surrounded by his own supporters but by the walls of an impregnable fortress which also happened to be one of the holiest sites in Russia. Even if the Streltsy attacked, they could not reach him there. But the Streltsy were not likely to launch such an attack. They were conservative, traditional, and blindly loyal to the Tsar. Lacking anything like political sophistication, they were uncertain how to choose between the duly appointed Regent Sophia and the anointed sovereign Tsar Ivan on the one side, and the anointed sovereign Tsar Peter on the other. Peter decided to test his authority and find out which way the Streltsy would fall by ordering Ivan Sykler, colonel of the Strumiany regiment, to join him at Troitsky, along with 50 of his men. Once Sykler was actually in Peter's presence, he became obedient and humble, promising to do whatever Peter wished, so long as he would protect them against any reprisals from his sister. Peter then wrote to the colonels of all the other Streltsy regiments, ordering them to leave the Kremlin and come to Troitsky, but they were as overwhelmed by Sophia's proximity as Sykler had been by Peter's. She threatened to behead any of the Streltsy that tried to leave Moscow, and the colonels, at least, listened to her. Day by day, ordinary soldiers were deserting the posts near the Kremlin to travel to Preobrazhensko and present themselves as faithful subjects of the younger Tsar. Sophia did not wish to attack, depose, imprison, or kill Peter. Throughout the summer, she attempted to reconcile with him. But reconciliation meant that Peter would remain under Sophia's authority, something he was no longer willing to do. In truth, once Peter realized that his greatest strength lay in the legitimacy of his position as Tsar, there was nothing Sophia could do to stop him from taking power. Since neither Sophia nor Peter was willing to fight, everything depended on the loyalty of the Streltsy and foreign officers in Moscow, like Patrick Gordon, who held key positions in the Russian army. The Streltsy, though they were 20,000 strong and capable of terrible destruction, were almost childlike in the deference to whoever they perceived as having rightful authority over them. The trouble lay in controlling this perception, because they were liable to being influenced. Peter, it turned out, was enormously influential. And many of the foreign officers had helped train Peter's play regiments when he was a boy. They knew his character well enough to understand which way the wind was blowing. On August 4, 1689, Peter sent a message to the Kremlin declaring that Fyodor Shaklovity, Sophia's chief lieutenant besides Golitsyn, had conspired against his life. He ordered that Shaklovity be arrested and sent to Troitsky to face justice. The news came as a shattering blow to Sophia. The Streltsy remaining in Moscow had come to realize that they were now on the losing side of the power contest between the regent and the Tsar, and they demanded that she turn Shaklovity over to them so that they might take him to Troitsky as a sign of their obedience. Sophia refused, until they threatened to rise up against her, storming the Kremlin as they had done 7 years ago in the purge of the Narishkins. The Streltsy had brought her to power, and now they would bring her low again. One by one, Peter ordered the arrest, torture, and death or exile of each member of Sophia's inner circle. Golitsyn was banished to Siberia. Shaklovity was executed. Tsar Ivan, at Peter's request, asked Sophia to leave the Kremlin and take up residence at Novodevichy convent. She was not required to become a nun, and was given a large suite with luxurious furnishings and a complement of servants. But she could be visited there by no one except her female relatives. She was, in effect, being returned to the Terem, a devastating fate for the first woman ever to rule Russia. Peter was so intimidated by Sophia that he refused to leave Troitsky and take up his seat in Moscow until she was safely behind the walls of the convent. Later in life, he described his sister as a princess endowed with all the accomplishments of body and mind to perfection, had it not been for her boundless ambition and insatiable desire for governing. It was, of course, characteristic of the time and place where Sophia lived that ambition and the will to govern were perceived as flaws in her character. But in her regency, Sophia Alexeyevna had thrown open a door that would not be shut again for more than 100 years. Peter himself would be succeeded by a woman, Catherine I. She would be followed, with only brief interruptions, by short-lived male rulers, by Anna, daughter of Ivan, her own daughter, Elizaveta, and finally, Catherine the Great, the last of Russia's great autocrats. Chapter 2. The Tsar in Europe. The All-Drunken Synod. For the first 5 years after Sophia's regency ended, from 1689 to 1694, Peter's day-to-day life was not remarkably different than it had been when his sister was running the government. He was less interested in governing Russia than he was in being able to do whatever he liked without Sophia, his mother Natalia, or his wife Eudoxia interfering. To his brother and Kotsar Ivan, Peter delegated all the ceremonies and formalities the Tsar was required to participate in. Affairs of government were left to his uncle Lev Narishkin, who was made chief foreign minister, Tikhon Streshnev, who was in charge of domestic policy, and Boris Golitsyn, cousin of Sophia's advisor Vasily Golitsyn.